Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
Now, Donald Trump's refusal to commit to the result of the US presidential election in the third presidential debate last night was a serious moment for the world's biggest democracy, even by the terms of this campaign, which apparently shocked even his own backroom team.
I want to ask you here on the stage tonight, do you make the same commitment that you will absolutely, sir, that you will absolutely accept the result of this election?
I will look at it at the time. I'm not looking at anything now. I'll look at it at the time. What I've seen is so bad. I will tell you at the time. I'll keep you in suspense.
Well,
okay?
Chris, let me respond to that because that's horrifying. You know, every time Donald thinks things are not going in his direction, he claims whatever it is rigged against him.
Well, today at a rally in Delaware, Trump had a slightly moderated message. He will accept the results of the US election if he wins.
I would like to promise and pledge to all of my voters and supporters, and to all of the people of the United States, that I will totally accept the results of this great and historic presidential election if I win.
Well, in a moment, I'll be speaking to Walid Fares, an advisor to Donald Trump. But first, we'll go to the American political historian, Rick Perlstein. Good evening, Rick Perlstein. First of all, how big a deal do you think this was, Donald Trump, last night and then today? How dangerous do you think it is from your perspective?
I think it's about as calamitous a development for a democracy as can be imagined, not only for the legitimacy of this election, but the legitimacy of the thousands of elections that go on in America every year. Now, losers, and by the way, that's not a moderation of his position at all, saying he'll only accept the results of the elections if he wins, is saying he will not accept the results of the election. Now thousands of politicians around the country can be licensed to do the same thing, and if that happens, we'll have a cascade that threatens the very foundations of our republic. It's dangerous.
But, of course, you know, a lot of people would say this is just Donald Trump blustering. This is just what he does.
Well, what he did in 2012 was he tweeted that because Barack Obama was ahead in the Electoral College at a time in which John McCain was ahead in the popular vote, he'd call a march on Washington. What he says has consequences. He has supporters who treat everything he does as gospel. A lot of these supporters have guns. They've promised to bring them to the polling places. He has already distorted the election very, very badly by making people believe that it's not legitimate. They might not show up. And that's just terrible for a country that relies on the rule of law and the norms of respectability and reciprocal obligation.
Well, you have obviously studied American political history. Now, has there ever been anything like this actually saying that the actual election could be rigged before?
Never. The Trump people are trying to compare this to 2000 when Al Gore asked for a recount. But actually what happened was when the election was announced for George W. Bush, Gore accepted the results, and then because of the closeness of the vote in Florida, an automatic recount was kicked in by the procedure of law, and he let that go forward. It's a completely different situation, completely unprecedented.
Well, let's say that on November the 9th, Donald Trump loses the popular vote and challenges. What could actually happen? How long could it go through the courts?
Well, we have the precedent in 2000, if it's close enough, which it doesn't look like it's going to be, by the way. In most polls, Clinton is 6, 7, 8, 9, 10% ahead. Then a procedure that will happen is actually very complicated because it's handled state by state, and even precinct by precinct. We don't have a federal election system in America, so it could be a colossal mess. And that would be a crisis not only for America, but the world.
What do you think the long-term impact of this questioning of the validity of the American electoral system might be?
hopefully nothing. That's up to Mr. Trump. I implore him to think of the country, think of the world, and do the patriotic thing and accept the results of the election. Because if he doesn't, the long-term impact of the most powerful democracy in the world, in the eyes of the rest of the world being questioned, would reverberate everywhere. We would not be able to hold the rest of the world to any kind of standard, which is the way America has tried to do things, sometimes honoring them in the breach for 240 years now.
Thank you very much indeed, Rick Perlstein. And we can be joined now by Walid Fares, who is foreign policy advisor to Donald Trump, who declined to have a conversation with Mr. Perlstein. Good evening to you.
Good evening.
Why is Donald Trump doing this now?
Well, you can see clearly that the attacks against Mr. Trump goes on all levels. They're trying to make him into a cartoon. This is not what actually he meant and said in terms of, if I lose elections, I will actually do a contestation of the result. No. If it's rigged, if it's clearly rigged, and to do that, it's not about him to decide, it's his lawyers, and the results coming from various states. And indeed, the previous speaker has mentioned that in 2000, precisely, President George Bush and Mr. Gore, former Vice President Gore, had asked the investigation, and the Supreme Court decided, so it's not so different.
But that was on the question of a particular number of votes, and Al Gore stepped back. Where is the evidence that Donald Trump is accumulating that there is rigging? Where is this evidence? Is it with his lawyers?
Oh. It is all over the net, ma'am. I mean, your viewers can go and check the cases appearing in Colorado, in Florida. This is not to say that rigging is going to happen, but he's taking measures. He's saying if it is going to happen, plus the attacks against headquarters of the GOP, then I am going to take measures. I'm not going to let myself go. I think what he's saying is because in last election, I was the advisor to Governor Romney, there were riggings, and the governor refused to react to those. I think that's what he's trying to say.
Well, but I mean, the Gore situation was quite different because it was mandated for an automatic recount on the question of the hanging Chaz, and that was settled. Now we're in a quite different situation. And the Republican Arizona senator said, Donald Trump saying he might not accept the result is beyond the pale. He does not have the support of senior Republicans in the stand that he's taking.
Basically, if Donald Trump said, if I lose, I will go against it, then yes, and I will agree with that. And many members of his family and his party would. That is not what he said. He said if there is rigging and if there are problems. He cannot say what the problems are because we're not yet at the ballot boxes.
So
he's sending a warning.
He's hedging his bets. Right today at that rally, it was perfectly clear if he wins, there will be no investigation. What he was saying is if he doesn't win. So is this just Donald Trump blustering then?
Ma'am, if you heard his tone, I'm sure you saw the video. He was sarcastic. His people were waiting for him to say if I lose, and he said if I win, and then everybody was clapping. This is Donald Trump's style. So he did not mean that if I really am defeated, I'm going to certainly go and refuse the election. And that's not even the substance discussions on strategic issues.
So let's be quite clear that this is just Donald Trump's style. And as the polls widen, do you think this is him saying, really, I know I'm going to lose?
Donald Trump knows exactly that his voters are not impacted by the propaganda campaign waged against him. He wants to make sure that this part of his constituencies are going to be going to vote.
Right.
And we know that he's not backed by many politicians in his party. So that's his political right to do so, to say so. In a different circumstances, he may not have, but that's what he did.
So this is the kind of strategy, a kind of cynical strategy that you would suggest that he pursue?
I would not suggest that for the point that I am not an advisor on domestic issues, but on international and national security. I would not recommend that he would say so had he not been under attack of the kind of attacks, cartoon attack, over the past 2 weeks. You
heard the previous speaker talking about people taking their guns to polling stations and so forth, that actually some people take... You would suggest he's being sarcastic, but a lot of people you would believe and agree, presumably, take Donald Trump at his word, believe absolutely everything he says and the tone in which he says it. Is there not a problem that there could be incitement?
Mr. Trump has never asked any of his followers to take any gun anywhere. The only violence that we saw were against GOP centers in North Carolina and other places. It is certainly not Mr. Trump who's going to be calling on insurrections if he loses, but he has been sending this message because he saw, and many of his advisors told him, that there are preparations, maybe not coming from the top, but he is warning that he's not going to be silent if there are illegal acts committed against these elections. He's in defense of democracy, not against it.
Thank you very much for joining us tonight.